Hi everyone, my name is Jade and I will be reviewing how my final project went since we last spoke. My project, if you remember, was making a famous Thai dessert called Chup, which is a sweet mung bean paste that gets shaped and painted to look like tiny fruits and vegetables. So today I will be covering how the process of making Chup was done, the problems or concerns I had along the way, things I discovered while making this, or anything that changed from my initial presentation, and so on. So the major thing that changed from my initial presentation was where I was getting my recipe from. Initially, I was going to use the Lion brand recipe on their blog, but noticed that the serving size was way too much and the directions weren't that clear. Therefore, I discovered a tutorial on YouTube by Hot Thai Kitchen that I followed for the recipe, such as the amount of each ingredient needed and the overall step-by-step guide that they offered. So the ingredients I needed to make Chup was half a cup of split and peeled mung beans, 1 to 2 tablespoons of Thai agar-agar powder, and both of these I could only really find on Amazon. I also needed half a cup of coconut milk, a third cup of sugar, and a pinch of salt. For the utensils, I needed some wooden skewers, small paintbrushes, food coloring, foam bricks, and small ramekins. So the first step in this process is to take your washed mung beans and heat them to a boil with about 2 cups of water. Once they start to get soft and a little mushy, or when most of the water is cooked out, you add the sugar, salt, and coconut milk. Just stir to combine and remove from the heat. The next step was to blend the bean concoction until smooth. In my initial presentation, the instructions were to steam the beans in a steamer lined with cheesecloth to make the beans soft, but I found that boiling them and putting them in a blender was easier and more practical for me. The next step was to heat all of the moisture out of the paste. The picture on the left was the paste straight out of the blender, and the picture in the middle was after about 20 minutes when the sides started to crack and very little moisture was left. I then wrapped the paste in plastic wrap and allowed it to cool overnight. The next step was to portion out the future fruits and vegetables, so there is a nice ratio between paste and gelatin once we are done. I didn't have a kitchen scale, however, so I estimated each ball to be about the same size, even though later on while I was shaping I had to make a lot of these smaller than originally portioned. The next step was to shape the paste into whichever fruits and vegetables you want. I chose oranges, cherries, lemons, corn, eggplant, chilies, watermelon, and pumpkin. I found that the most difficult one to shape by far was surprisingly the watermelon. The rest were pretty simple. The next step was to paint or dip the Chup into their corresponding colors. I diluted the gel food coloring with 2 tablespoons of water each, which ended up being way too diluted. The only color that worked with this method was the yellow. I also noticed here that my bean paste was probably too dry, or I didn't work fast enough because they were starting to crack on the outside. So here I took straight gel food coloring for the fruits and vegetables that needed red, orange, green, or purple, and hand painted them. The more concentrated and darker food coloring hid the cracks a bit better, and this is what they looked like before the agar-agar. While the Chup was drying, I made the agar-agar glaze. I boiled 3 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of agar-agar powder and kept boiling it until it turned clear, which is a few minutes after the picture shown. You have to use agar-agar, not gelatin, with Chup because gelatin won't dry and harden at room temperature like agar-agar. The next step was to dip the Chup into the warm agar-agar glaze. You don't want it to cool down or it will get clumps in it, but you don't want it to be boiling hot or it will strip off the food dye. I did this a total of 3 times for each, although you can dip them up to 5 times each, depending on how thick you want the glaze to be. After allowing the Chup to dry completely, you then have to remove the Chup from their skewers and trim the excess dried glaze off the Chup. There will be a substantial hole in each look chop after you do this from the skewer, but it's okay because this is where our leaves will go. The final step in this process is to decorate the look chop with tiny leaves to make them look more realistic. I think I used small leaves from a rose bush, and although you don't actually eat the leaves with the look chop, you need to make sure the leaves you use aren't toxic if ingested, just to be safe. And this is the final look of my homemade look chop. My favorite ones were definitely the chilies and the pumpkins, while my least favorite were the sad watermelons and the corn. Overall, I think they turned out looking good for my first time making these. The taste of my look chop was obviously a sweet bean paste dessert, which was really nice and smooth and creamy. The hard agar-agar on the outside, however, was my least favorite part. It is added to make the dessert have more texture, and texture it did have. It almost felt like I was chewing on tasteless wax, which was mildly unpleasant. So from start to finish, this project took me a total of 3 consecutive days to complete and probably over 8 hours total. I knew going into this that it was going to be a time-consuming project, but overall it was very fun to make. However, I wasn't a fan of the taste, so I will most likely never make these again. And these are my sources. I will compile all of the videos I took while making Look Chop, speed them up, make it fancy, maybe add some music in the background, and upload a YouTube video showing the process shortly.